Maya stood outside the large courthouse, her heart racing faster than she had ever felt before. The building looked intimidating with its tall marble pillars, wide steps, and heavy wooden doors that seemed to belong in another world. She adjusted the folder in her hands, the one she had spent countless nights preparing. Inside it were the documents that carried her family's hope. She was only a teenager, but today she wasn't here for herself. She was here for her family, her late mother's dream, and the house that held all their memories. The courthouse lobby was full of noise, lawyers rushing with briefcases, security officers checking bags, and families whispering about their cases. Maya walked slowly, her steps echoing against the tiled floor. She wore a plain blouse and skirt, clothes that were slightly oversized because they had belonged to her older cousin. Everyone else seemed polished, professional, and older. Some people gave her puzzled looks, as though wondering why such a young girl was walking confidently into a courtroom without an adult by her side. She ignored the stares, though inside her chest she felt small. When she entered the courtroom, the air changed. It was colder, quieter, and heavier. The high ceilings made the room feel like a place of authority where every word mattered. On one side sat the property developer's lawyer, a tall man in a sharp navy suit, his briefcase placed neatly on the polished desk. The developer himself, a man with graying hair and a smirk that never left his lips, leaned back in his chair as if he already owned the world. On the other side was Maya, alone, with only her folder. The judge walked in, a man with silver hair and a long black robe that trailed as he moved. Everyone stood, then sat when he took his seat at the bench. His eyes scanned the room, but when they fell on Maya, they lingered for a moment. He raised his brows in surprise, then gave a small chuckle, shaking his head slightly as if to say this was a waste of his time. Maya caught it, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she forced herself to look straight ahead. The bailiff called the case, the matter of Johnson Family versus Fairmont Development Corporation. The words echoed, and Maya felt the weight of them. This was her family's name, her mother's legacy, being called into question in front of strangers. She took a deep breath, stood up, and walked slowly to the front. Her knees trembled, but she held the folder tightly as if it could anchor her. The judge leaned forward, peering at her over his glasses. "You're here for this case?" His voice was sharp, slightly mocking. "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied softly but clearly. He chuckled again, and the sound bounced around the courtroom. "A teenager? You think you can stand here and argue a legal case?" His tone carried amusement, but it also carried dismissal, as though he had already decided she didn't belong. Maya nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe I can speak for my family." The developer's lawyer smirked, flipping through his notes as though her words meant nothing. The developer himself leaned forward, whispering something in the lawyer's ear, both of them laughing quietly. The sound stabbed at Maya's courage, but she tightened her grip on the folder. The judge sighed. "Very well. Let's see what you think you can do. You may begin." The room was silent except for the sound of her footsteps as she moved toward the podium. Maya opened her folder, her fingers trembling slightly, but as soon as she looked down at the papers, she felt a strange calm. She remembered her late mother, who used to sit at the kitchen table with stacks of law books, explaining things in simple words so Maya could understand. Her mother had always said, "Knowledge is power, even when the world thinks you don't have any." Maya lifted her chin and began. "Your Honor, this case is about my family's home. It is not only a house made of bricks and wood. It is the place where my grandmother raised her children, where my mother grew up, and where we all have lived for generations. The property developer says he has a right to it, but the documents I hold show something different. They show that we still have the right to keep it." Her voice was soft but steady. A few people in the gallery leaned forward, curious. The judge tapped his pen impatiently on the bench, but Maya did not stop. She pulled out the first document, a property deed with signatures that went back years. She held it up and explained, "This is the original deed signed by my grandfather. It clearly states that the property cannot be sold without the consent of the heirs. That means my mother had a say, and now my family has a say." The developer ignored this. The judge raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "And where did you learn all this, young lady?" Maya looked at him without fear. "From my mother. She studied law before she passed away. She taught me to read these documents. I know what they mean." A few whispers ran through the room. The lawyer shifted in his seat, no longer smiling as widely. The judge, however, let out a small laugh. "So, you're telling me you learned the law at your kitchen table?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied firmly. "And that's why I am here. Because no one else will fight for us." The laughter from the judge stung, but Maya refused to lower her eyes. Instead, she turned another page and continued explaining. She pointed out dates, signatures, and legal clauses with surprising precision. The more she spoke, the more the room quieted. Even the gallery, which had been restless at first, now listened closely. Still, every time she paused, the judge chuckled or shook his head, as though this was a performance rather than a real case. Maya's heart ached, but she reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't about his laughter. This was about saving her family's home. As she laid the papers neatly on the podium, Maya felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a teenager anymore. She was her mother's daughter, carrying the weight of her family's history, standing against people who thought power and money could silence her. The judge might laugh, the lawyer might sneer, but Maya had started something that could not be ignored. She had spoken, and the truth was now in the open. And even though the room still carried the echo of the judge's mocking laughter, there was also something new: silence. The kind of silence that meant people were beginning to realize this young girl might not be as powerless as they first believed. Maya stood at the podium with her folder open, her heart pounding but her voice steady. The judge still wore a smirk as he leaned back in his chair, and the property developer's lawyer looked at her like she was wasting everyone's time. The lawyer's pen tapped lightly against the desk, as if he was waiting for her to stumble so he could pounce. The developer himself crossed his arms, his expression smug, confident that a teenager could not possibly challenge him in a court of law. When Maya finished presenting her first set of documents, the judge tilted his head and gave a half laugh. "Young lady," he said slowly, "this is not a school debate. You can't just bring papers and think that makes a case. You're not a lawyer." A few people in the gallery chuckled nervously. The lawyer's grin grew wider, and he stood up. "Your Honor, if I may," he said. Without waiting for permission, he adjusted his glasses and looked down at Maya like she was a child lost in the wrong room. "This girl clearly doesn't understand the law. While her passion is admirable, property rights are not preserved by family stories or sentimental value. My client has already filed the appropriate claims. This matter is clear." He sat down again with a sharp smile. The judge nodded, glancing at Maya with amusement. "You see? This is why trained lawyers handle these cases. Now, are you sure you want to continue embarrassing yourself?" The words stung like needles, but Maya refused to step back. She had prepared for this moment, and she would not let their laughter erase her family's truth. She held the folder tighter and spoke again, her voice louder than before. "Your Honor, with all respect, I understand that I am not a lawyer. But this case is about my family's home, and no one cares more than I do. If you look closely at the documents, you will see something that was ignored." She pulled out another paper, this one a record from the county office. She placed it on the podium and slid it toward the bailiff, who carried it up to the judge. "This paper shows that the transfer of ownership filed by the developer's company was missing a signature. It was incomplete. That means the transfer was invalid." And yet, they still tried to take our home. The judge looked at the paper, then at Maya. His smirk faltered, though he quickly covered it with another chuckle. And where did you find this? In the public records office, Maya answered firmly. I went there myself. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. People were surprised that a teenager had gone to such lengths, digging through official documents and preparing arguments on her own. The lawyer frowned, flipping through his files with a sudden urgency. He had overlooked that record. His face tightened, and the smugness he had worn earlier began to slip. The developer leaned toward him and whispered something harshly, his jaw clenched. The lawyer nodded quickly, but his hands trembled as he pulled out his own papers, scanning them. The judge tapped his pen on the bench. Even if this is true, he said, his voice heavier now, you are still not qualified to make legal arguments in this court. The law requires proper representation. What do you think you're doing? Maya met his gaze without fear. I'm doing what my mother taught me to do. She told me never to stay silent when something is wrong. She couldn't be here because she passed away, so I'm here. Maybe you don't think my words matter because I'm young. But the truth is in these papers, whether I'm a lawyer or not. For the first time, the gallery was quiet. No one laughed. A few people even nodded slightly, admiring her courage. The judge shifted in his seat, clearly unsettled by the determination in her voice. The lawyer suddenly stood again. Objection, Your Honor. This girl is wasting time with irrelevant claims. The developer has already invested money into this project, and any delays cause him great financial harm. Maya turned to face him, her hands shaking but her voice steady. And what about the harm to my family? What about the memories, the roots, the generations of people who lived in that house? You think money is more important than a family's history? Her words struck the room like a stone dropped in still water. The lawyer froze, his objection hanging in the air unanswered. The judge raised a hand to silence the murmurs from the gallery. Enough, he said firmly. We will stick to facts, not emotions. Maya nodded. Then let's talk facts. She opened another page and revealed old photographs of her mother and grandmother in front of the house, holding legal documents. She placed them on the podium. This is proof that the house has always been part of my family's life. And this, she lifted another paper, is proof that the developer knew about the restriction on the deed. He ignored it. The lawyer stood frozen, his mouth half open. He had no immediate reply. The developer's smirk had disappeared completely. He leaned back in his chair, his face pale with anger. The judge cleared his throat. His smirk was gone now, replaced with a more serious expression. He shuffled the papers before him, flipping through them carefully. The silence in the room grew heavy. Maya watched him, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, but she stood tall. After what felt like forever, the judge looked up. You are very persistent, he said slowly. His voice no longer carried the mocking tone it had before. But persistence is not enough. Do you have anything else? Maya took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I have more. But before I show it, I want to say this. You laughed at me when I walked in. Everyone did. You think I'm just a teenager who doesn't belong here. But I belong here because this case is about my family. You can laugh at me, but you cannot laugh at the truth. The gallery erupted into quiet gasps. The judge blinked, caught off guard by her boldness. The lawyer clenched his jaw, flipping through his papers faster, desperate to find a counterargument. Maya calmly laid out the next set of evidence, line by line, showing that the developer's company had rushed the paperwork and ignored legal requirements. The more she spoke, the more the laughter faded. The courtroom, once filled with smirks and dismissive stares, was now a place of silence, where every word she spoke carried weight. By the time she finished, The lawyer was visibly shaken, and the judge was no longer laughing. For the first time that day, Maya felt something shift. She had not only defended her family's honor but had also silenced the arrogance of those who thought she was powerless. And though the outcome was not yet decided, one thing was clear: the judge's laughter would not define her. Her courage, her voice, and her determination would. The courtroom felt heavier as Maya closed her folder for a moment to steady her hands. She could feel the sweat on her palms, but she refused to let her nerves show. The judge no longer had the same amused smirk he wore earlier. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, studying her more carefully now. The property developer's lawyer looked restless, tapping his pen against the desk with a rhythm that betrayed his unease. The developer himself leaned closer to whisper angrily to his lawyer, but even he could not hide the cracks forming in his confidence. Maya glanced at the gallery. Dozens of eyes were on her, some filled with curiosity, others with quiet admiration. She knew that many of them had walked in expecting a short and simple hearing, but now the atmosphere had shifted. No one could deny that the teenager in the plain blouse was holding her ground against professionals who underestimated her. She cleared her throat and began again. "Your Honor, I would like to continue showing the timeline of events." She opened her folder and pulled out another set of documents. Her fingers no longer shook as much. With each word, her confidence grew. The developer filed a claim for ownership, but according to county records, this claim was made before the original family contract had expired. That means their action was premature. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the paper handed to him by the bailiff. His brow furrowed as he read the dates. He murmured, half to himself. These dates do not line up neatly. The lawyer quickly stood. "Objection, Your Honor. These documents may be inaccurate. This young lady cannot possibly understand the full weight of legal procedures." But before he could finish, Maya interrupted him for the first time. "With respect, sir, I understand enough. I spent weeks cross-checking these records at the county office. They stamped them in front of me. The dates are accurate, and you know it." The gallery stirred with whispers again. The lawyer's face flushed with embarrassment as he sank slowly back into his chair. He muttered something under his breath, but it was clear that Maya's calm but firm response had unsettled him. Maya turned back to the judge. "This is not about whether I have a law degree. This is about facts. And the facts show that my family's rights were ignored." The judge looked at her silently for a moment, then gave a slow nod. It was not approval, but it was also not dismissal. It was acknowledgement. Maya's heart beat faster, but she pressed on. "Your Honor, I would also like to submit testimony." She reached into her folder and pulled out a handwritten letter. Her eyes softened as she held it up. "This is from my mother before she passed. She wrote about the importance of protecting our home, knowing there would be people who would try to take it. She knew the law, and she taught me everything she could. This is not just about a house. It is about justice." Her voice cracked slightly at the word justice, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. She placed the letter on the podium and continued. "She always told me, truth can stand on its own, even when people laugh at it. That's why I am here." The judge shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. He tried to hide it by clearing his throat. "We will consider the letter for what it is," he said cautiously. But the weight of Maya's words lingered in the room. The property developer could no longer remain silent. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his face red with frustration. "We are wasting time on a child's fantasy. That house is mine, and this performance changes nothing." The gallery gasped at his outburst. Even the judge raised a hand sharply. "Order in the court," he said sternly. "Sit down, Mr. Fairmont." Maya did not flinch at the developer's anger. Instead, She calmly opened another document. Your Honor, this is evidence that Mr. Fairmont knew about the restrictions on the deed. He signed an acknowledgement form months ago. This proves he knowingly tried to bypass the law. The bailiff carried the paper to the judge, who examined it with narrowed eyes. The silence in the courtroom was so thick that every turn of the judge's page echoed loudly. Finally, he looked up at the developer, whose face had gone pale. This is serious, the judge said slowly. If this acknowledgement is genuine, it undermines your claim. The developer's lawyer scrambled to his feet again. Your Honor, there must be a mistake. These papers could have been misfiled. Maya raised her voice firmly. They weren't misfiled. I got them certified myself. The stamp is right there. The judge inspected the stamp and nodded. It is indeed certified. The lawyer sat down heavily, his shoulders slumped. The developer clenched his fists on the table, furious but speechless. Maya took another steady breath. She could feel the shift in the air more strongly now. For the first time, the judge seemed less dismissive. For the first time, the developer and his lawyer were the ones scrambling for footing. Still, the judge leaned back and said, Miss Johnson, while you have presented compelling material, you must understand that this is highly unusual. Courts rely on trained professionals for a reason. What makes you think you can carry this any further? Maya looked straight at him. Because I know the truth, Your Honor. And because this case is not just about a house. It's about whether people like my family are heard. If you ignore me just because I'm young, then you're not ignoring me, you're ignoring the truth. Her words landed heavily in the silent courtroom. The judge's pen stopped moving. His eyes rested on her for a long time. In the gallery, a woman whispered, "She's brave." Someone else nodded in agreement. Slowly, the mood in the room shifted even further. The people who had chuckled earlier now leaned forward, waiting for every word. Maya continued, her voice steady and strong. I may not be a lawyer. But I am a daughter, a granddaughter, and someone who refuses to let the truth be buried. You can laugh at me, but you cannot erase the facts. Her words hung in the air like a bell. The room was so silent that even the sound of the ceiling fan above seemed loud. For the first time that day, the judge said nothing. He simply looked at her, his face unreadable. The developer sat rigid, his smugness gone, his lawyer silent beside him. The gallery held its breath. Maya closed her folder slowly and stepped back from the podium, her chin lifted high. She knew the fight was not over. But she also knew something important had happened. The balance of power in the room had begun to shift. And though the judge had started the day by laughing at her, now the entire courtroom sat in silence, waiting, wondering what she would reveal next. Maya stood tall, her folder pressed close to her chest, while the courtroom remained wrapped in silence. The judge's eyes no longer carried the playful glint they had earlier. His laughter had faded, replaced by something more uncertain, perhaps even cautious. The lawyer kept shuffling his papers as though trying to discover a hidden lifeline, and the property developer sat stiff, his jaw tight, his earlier arrogance drained away. The gallery held its collective breath, unsure of what would come next. Maya stepped back to the podium slowly. She could feel her heart hammering inside her chest, but her face showed none of that. She had reached the point where fear no longer mattered. What mattered was that she told the truth, every last piece of it. She opened her folder once more and pulled out an envelope that she had saved for this very moment. Her fingers smoothed it before she spoke. Your Honor, she said clearly, I have one final piece of evidence that has not yet been shared. I believe it will change how everyone in this room sees this case. The judge raised his brows, leaning forward. Go on. Maya took a deep breath. She looked briefly at the lawyer and the developer, both of whom narrowed their eyes at her, as if trying to guess what she was about to reveal. Then she looked at the gallery, at the many faces watching her with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Finally, She returned her gaze to the judge. This case is not just about paperwork. It's about truth. And the truth is that my family has been fighting people like Mr. Fairmont for years. People who think money and power give them the right to take from those who have less. But my mother, before she passed, she made sure we would not be alone in this fight. She opened the envelope and pulled out a letter stamped with an official seal. The sight of that seal sent a ripple through the courtroom. Even the lawyer froze mid-motion, his eyes fixed on it. This, Maya said, holding the letter up for all to see, is a confirmation from the State Bar Association. It shows that our case has already been flagged for review by a higher court due to irregularities in how the developer filed his claims. My mother's law firm, though small, had merged with a larger firm shortly before she passed. They knew this case would be important, and they promised her they would protect it. The judge blinked in surprise, and the gallery gasped. The developer leaned forward, his face turning red. "What?" he burst out, his voice echoing through the chamber. "That's impossible." The lawyer tried to shush him, but the damage was done. The gallery erupted into murmurs, whispers flying back and forth as everyone tried to understand what had just happened. The bailiff moved quickly to quiet the room, but the energy had shifted. Maya calmly placed the letter on the podium and continued. "I may be young. I may not wear a suit or carry a law degree. But I am not alone. My family is not alone. There are attorneys outside this courtroom who already know everything about this case. They are ready to step in if necessary. They wanted me to speak first because my mother believed in my voice, and they respected that." The judge's expression darkened into seriousness. He picked up the letter and examined the seal carefully. His fingers traced the stamp, and he let out a low breath. This is authentic," he murmured. The lawyer jumped to his feet, panic flashing in his eyes. "Your Honor, surely this is a mistake. There must have been some mix-up with the Bar Association." The judge cut him off sharply. "Enough. This document is official. It is not a mistake." The lawyer sank back into his chair, pale and sweating. The developer's fist slammed the table, making the papers jump. "You mean to tell me I've been dragged into this courtroom only for a teenager to humiliate me? This is outrageous." The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Sit down, Mr. Fairmont, or you will be held in contempt." The room went completely still. Maya did not flinch at the developer's outburst. Instead, she looked directly at the judge and spoke with calm determination. "Your Honor, I came here knowing people would laugh at me. And you did. You laughed because you thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too powerless. But I am my mother's daughter. I grew up watching her fight these battles. And even though she's gone, I carry her strength with me. So laugh if you want, but remember this truth does not care about age. Justice does not care about who delivers it. What matters is that it is spoken." Her words filled the courtroom like thunder. The gallery was silent, the kind of silence that meant every single person had been struck by what she said. The judge's eyes softened slightly, though his face remained stern. The lawyer stared at the floor, and the developer looked as though he had swallowed something bitter. Maya took one last step forward. "This is not just about saving my family's home. This is about proving that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, can stand above the law. My mother knew it, and now everyone in this room knows it." The judge sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. For the first time that day, there was no trace of laughter, no mocking tone. He studied Maya with the seriousness reserved for seasoned lawyers, not teenagers. "You have given this court much to consider," he said quietly. The gallery exhaled in unison, as though they had been holding their breath. The property developer leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. The lawyer shook his head, his shoulders slumped in defeat. It was clear they both knew the tide had turned. The arrogance they had walked in with had evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that they were no longer in control. Maya, still standing at the podium, closed her folder with steady hands. She had revealed everything her mother had prepared, everything she had fought so hard to uncover. She knew the fight wasn't fully over yet, but she also knew one thing for certain: she had silenced the laughter. The courtroom, which had begun with mocking chuckles and sneers, was now wrapped in stunned silence. And in that silence, Maya stood taller than she ever had before. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the ticking of the old clock hanging on the back wall. Maya stood at the podium, her folder finally closed, her breathing slow but steady. She had laid everything out: the deeds, the missing signatures, the certified records, and finally, the sealed letter from the State Bar Association. There was nothing more to show. Nothing more to prove. The rest was no longer in her hands. The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes on Maya. The mocking tone he had carried earlier in the day was gone, replaced with a heavy silence. He tapped his pen once, twice, against the wood, and then stopped. The courtroom waited. The lawyer shifted in his seat, sweat rolling down his temple as he tried to prepare for whatever would come next. The property developer, once smug and confident, now sat with his arms folded tight, his face pale and stiff. The gallery whispered in low voices, their curiosity growing by the second. Finally, the judge spoke. "Miss Johnson," he said slowly, his voice deep and deliberate. "You have presented this case with persistence and clarity. While you are not a trained attorney, the facts you have brought forward cannot be ignored." Maya nodded politely, though inside her chest, her heart raced like a drum. The judge continued, his gaze shifting to the lawyer and the developer. "The documents clearly show that the transfer of ownership was filed improperly and without the necessary authorization. Further, the acknowledgement form signed by Mr. Fairmont himself proves that he knew of these restrictions." He paused, his eyes narrowing at the developer. "This court does not take lightly attempts to deceive or bypass the law." The lawyer jumped to his feet in desperation. "Your Honor, if I may," but the judge cut him off with a sharp bang of the gavel. "Sit down. You have had your chance." The lawyer froze, his words stuck in his throat. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, defeated. The judge turned back to Maya. "Miss Johnson, your courage is commendable. You walked into this courtroom alone, knowing the odds against you, and yet you stood firm. That is something few adults, let alone teenagers, would dare to do." His voice softened slightly. "Your mother would be proud." Maya's throat tightened at his words, and her eyes stung. She blinked quickly, refusing to let tears fall. She wanted to remain strong until the very end. The judge lifted his gavel again. "This court hereby grants the Johnson family's appeal. The attempted seizure of the Johnson property is declared invalid, and the case will be forwarded to higher review to ensure justice is carried out in full." The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder in the room. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then, slowly, people in the gallery began to clap. It started softly, with one or two, but quickly grew into a wave of applause. The sound filled the chamber, bouncing off the high ceilings, washing over Maya like a tide. She stood still, her eyes wide, her heart overwhelmed. She had done it. The developer slammed his fist on the table, but no one paid him any mind. His lawyer tried to calm him down, but it was useless. The once powerful man now looked small, his voice drowned out by the applause of ordinary people who had witnessed something extraordinary. The judge gave a final stern look toward the developer. "This court will not tolerate arrogance above the law. Remember that." With that, he rose and left the bench, the black robe flowing behind him. The bailiff called for order, but even he smiled slightly as he watched Maya step back from the podium. As the applause quieted, people in the gallery leaned forward to whisper words of encouragement. "Well done. You were brave. Your mother raised a strong girl." Maya nodded politely, her cheeks warm, though her heart was still racing. She walked slowly back to her seat, her folder clutched tightly in her hands. For the first time since she had walked into the courthouse, her steps did not feel heavy. Instead, they felt light, as though the weight on her shoulders had finally been lifted. The developer and his lawyer gathered their papers in silence, their earlier laughter and smugness long gone. They did not dare meet Maya's eyes. They left the courtroom quickly, their heads low, their confidence shattered. When the courtroom began to empty, a woman from the gallery approached Maya. She wore a simple dress and carried a kind smile. "My dear," she said softly, "you reminded us all today that truth can come from anyone, no matter their age. Don't ever forget that." Maya thanked her quietly, her voice catching slightly, and hugged the folder close to her chest once more. As she walked out of the courtroom and stepped back into the sunlight, she paused at the top of the courthouse steps. The day was bright, the air fresh, and the city streets below were busy with people who had no idea what had just happened inside. She looked up at the sky for a moment, whispering under her breath, "I did it, Mama." Her chest swelled with pride. She knew this was only the beginning. There would still be challenges ahead. The higher courts would review the case, and the developer might try again. But the most important battle had already been won. She had proven that courage and truth could silence arrogance. She had silenced the laughter. And as she walked down the steps, people who had been in the gallery nodded and smiled at her. Some even stopped to shake her hand. Maya, the teenager who had walked into court alone, left that day with her head high, her voice heard, and her family's hope restored. For the rest of her life, she would remember that moment, the moment when laughter turned into silence, when doubt turned into respect, and when the truth stood taller than power.